The morning sun cast golden rays through the tall windows of St. Catherine's Cathedral, creating patterns of light across the marble floor. Julian Sinclair stood at the altar, his hands clasped behind his back, his face showing nothing. At 32 years old, he had built Sinclair Technologies from a garage startup into a global empire worth billions. He was known in business circles as the Ice King, a man who never smiled, never showed weakness, and never let emotions cloud his judgment. Today was supposed to be just another business deal. His grandmother, Margaret Sinclair, had spent her final months arranging this marriage. She believed that Julian needed someone to soften his edges, to bring warmth into his cold world. The bride was from the prestigious Brooks family, owners of a media empire that stretched across 3 continents. The marriage would unite 2 powerful dynasties and create opportunities neither family could achieve. Alone, Julian had agreed without argument. He owed his grandmother everything. She had raised him after his parents died in a plane crash when he was 8 years old. She had taught him to be strong, to never show pain, to build walls around his heart so high that nothing could hurt him again. If she wanted him to marry a stranger, he would do it. Business was business. The cathedral filled with guests dressed in expensive suits and designer gowns. Politicians sat beside movie stars. Tech giants chatted with media moguls. Everyone who mattered in high society had come to witness this union. Julian recognized most of them from board meetings and charity galas. He felt nothing as he watched them take their seats. His best friend, Owen Fletcher, stood beside him as best man. Owen had been trying all morning to lighten the mood, but Julian remained unmoved. Owen was the opposite of Julian in every way. Where Julian was serious, Owen was playful. Where Julian built walls, Owen built bridges. They had been friends since college. Owen was one of the few people who remembered that Julian had once been different. The organ music began, deep and solemn. The guests rose to their feet. Julian's heart beat steady and slow. He felt no nervousness, no anticipation, nothing at all. This was just another meeting, another contract to sign. Another day in his carefully controlled life. The cathedral doors opened, and the bride appeared. She wore a traditional white gown with intricate lace details that must have taken months to create. The dress hugged her figure before flowing out in a gentle train behind her. But what caught everyone's attention was the veil. It was unlike anything Julian had ever seen. Layers upon layers of the finest silk, decorated with tiny pearls that caught the light like stars. The veil covered her completely, hiding her face, her hair, everything. She looked like a beautiful mystery walking down the aisle. Her father, Robert Brooks, walked beside her. Robert was a powerful man in the media world, known for his sharp mind and sharper business practices. Julian had met him several times to discuss the marriage terms. Robert had been professional and distant, speaking about his daughter as if she were another asset in his portfolio. Julian had found it strange, but had said nothing. Many wealthy families treated their children as chess pieces in larger games. As the bride walked closer, Julian noticed something odd. Her steps were not the confident strides of a woman from privilege. There was hesitation in each movement, a slight tremor in her hands as they gripped the bouquet of white roses and lilies. She walked like someone approaching a cliff edge, not a wedding altar. The thought surprised Julian. He rarely noticed such details about people, but something about this woman pulled at his attention in a way he could not explain. When she reached the altar, Robert placed her hand in Julian's. Through the silk of her glove, Julian felt her fingers shaking. She was terrified. The realization made him pause. Was she being forced into this marriage too? Did she have her own demanding family? Her own impossible obligations? The priest, Father Matthews, began the ceremony with words about love and commitment that felt hollow in the grand cathedral. Julian barely heard them. His attention was fixed on the woman beside him. Who was she beneath that veil? What dreams had she given up to stand here? What life had she left behind? The ceremony moved forward with practiced precision. They exchanged rings, heavy bands of platinum and diamonds that felt like chains on Julian's finger. They recited vows written by lawyers promising partnership and respect, carefully avoiding words like love and passion. It was all very proper, very cold, very much what Julian expected. Then came the moment he had been dreading. Father Matthews smiled and said the traditional words that would seal their union. "You may now kiss the bride." Julian reached for the veil with steady hands. He had kissed women before at charity events and business dinners, brief, polite kisses that meant nothing. This would be no different. He would lift the veil, kiss his new wife quickly, and move on to the reception where real business could be discussed. He lifted the first layer of silk, then the second, then the third. The cathedral seemed to hold its breath as more of her face was revealed. Julian saw a delicate chin first, then lips painted soft rose pink, then a straight nose. And then his hands froze completely. Time stopped. The cathedral, the guests, the music. Everything faded away until there was only her face and the impossible truth it revealed. Julian forgot how to breathe. His heart, which had been beating so steady and slow, suddenly thundered in his chest like it wanted to break free. His hands, which never trembled during billion-dollar negotiations, shook as they held the veil. The woman standing before him, the woman he had just married, was not a stranger. She was Natalie, his Natalie, the woman he had loved with desperate intensity 10 years ago. The art student who had made him laugh for the first time since his parents died. The girl who had seen past his money and his name to the lonely boy underneath. The only person who had ever made him feel alive. The woman who had vanished without explanation, leaving only a note saying goodbye and a hole in his heart that had never healed. Her green eyes met his, and in them he saw everything: recognition, fear, sorrow, hope, and something else that made his breath catch. Love, after all these years. After all the silence, there was still love in her eyes, around them. The guests began to whisper, sensing that something unexpected was happening. But Julian heard none of it. All he could hear was his own heart breaking and healing at the same time. Natalie's lips trembled as she whispered 3 words that changed everything. "Hello, Julian." Julian's mind raced back through 10 years of memories in the span of a heartbeat. He was 22 again, standing in a small coffee shop near the university, watching a girl with paint-stained fingers sketch in a worn notebook. She had looked up and smiled at him, and for the first time since his parents died, Julian had felt something warm break through the ice around his heart. But now was not the time for memories. 300 guests watched them with curious eyes. Father Matthews waited patiently for the kiss that would seal their marriage. Robert Brooks stood in the front row, his expression unreadable, but his posture tense. Like a snake ready to strike, Julian made a decision in that frozen moment. He would protect Natalie first and demand answers later. Whatever had brought her here, whatever impossible circumstances had led to this reunion, he would not expose her in front of this crowd. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was supposed to be brief and formal, nothing more than a gesture for the cameras and the guests. But the moment their lips touched, Julian felt 10 years of loneliness crack open inside him. Natalie's lips were soft and trembling. She tasted like mint and memory and everything he had lost. The cathedral erupted in applause, but Julian barely heard it. When he pulled back, Natalie's eyes were glistening with unshed tears. She mouthed 2 words that only he could see. "I'm sorry." The reception was held in the grand ballroom of the Sinclair Hotel, one of Julian's many properties. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, and tables draped in white silk held centerpieces of orchids and roses. A string quartet played classical music while waiters in crisp uniforms served champagne and delicate appetizers. Julian moved through the crowd on autopilot, shaking hands and accepting congratulations, while his mind spun with questions. Natalie stayed close beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. To everyone else, they looked like any other newlywed couple. But Julian could feel the tension in her body, the way she flinched slightly whenever Robert Brooks looked in their direction. Owen pulled Julian aside during a quiet moment, his usually cheerful face creased with concern. "Something is very wrong here. I saw your face when you lifted that veil. You looked like you had seen a ghost." Julian trusted Owen more than anyone in the world, but he could not share this secret yet. Not until he understood what was happening. "I'm fine. just the reality of marriage setting in. Owen did not look convinced, but he let it go. Well, if you need anything, I'm here. Even if that means helping you escape to a tropical island. The words were meant as a joke, but they planted an idea in Julian's mind. Once this reception ended, he and Natalie would be expected to leave for their honeymoon. They would finally be alone. They could finally talk. During the required first dance, Julian held Natalie close as they moved across the floor to a waltz that felt painfully romantic, given the circumstances. This close, he could see the changes that time had written on her face. She was thinner than he remembered, with shadows under her eyes that makeup could not quite hide. There was a sadness in her that had not existed in the carefree girl he had known. "We need to talk," Julian whispered, keeping his expression neutral for the watching crowd. "Alone." Natalie nodded almost imperceptibly. "Tonight? Once we leave here, I'll tell you everything. But please, Julian, we have to be careful. Robert is watching. Is he your real father?" The question escaped before Julian could stop it. Pain flashed across Natalie's face. "No. My father died when I was 17. Robert is my stepfather, and he is a very dangerous man." Before Julian could ask more, the song ended. Robert appeared at their side, his smile perfect and empty. "May I have a dance with my daughter?" Julian had no choice but to step aside and watch as Robert led Natalie away. He noticed how her entire body changed around the older man. She became smaller somehow, her eyes downcast, her movements careful. Robert held her too tightly, his fingers digging into her back, and he leaned down to whisper something in her ear that made her face go pale. Julian's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Whatever hold Robert had over Natalie, Julian would break it. He had not built an empire by being weak or passive. If Robert Brooks thought he could control Julian's wife, he was about to learn a very painful lesson. The reception dragged on for hours. There were toasts from business partners who spoke about synergy and market expansion. There was cake cutting and bouquet tossing and all the traditional rituals that felt like theater. Through it all, Julian kept Natalie in his sight, watching for any sign of distress. Finally, as evening shadows stretched across the ballroom floor, it was time for them to leave. According to the schedule, they would spend their wedding night in the penthouse suite of the Sinclair Hotel before flying to Greece the next morning for a 2-week honeymoon. Julian and Natalie made their way through corridor of guests, throwing flower petals and rice. A limousine waited outside, gleaming black under the streetlights. As they approached the car, Robert pulled Natalie aside one last time. Julian could not hear what Robert said, but he saw Natalie's reaction. Her face drained of all color, and she nodded rapidly, like someone agreeing to terms they had no power to refuse. Robert released her with a smile that never reached his cold eyes. The limousine pulled away from the hotel, and suddenly they were alone. The privacy screen separated them from the driver. The tinted windows hid them from the world outside. For the first time in 10 years, Julian and Natalie were truly alone together. Natalie collapsed against the leather seat, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. She pulled off the elaborate veil and let it fall to the floor. Her dark hair tumbled free, and she closed her eyes, looking exhausted beyond measure. "Start talking," Julian said, his voice harder than he intended. 10 years of hurt and confusion sharpened his words. "Tell me why you left. Tell me why you were pretending to be Robert Brooks' daughter. Tell me everything." Natalie opened her eyes, and the pain in them was so deep that Julian felt his anger soften despite himself. "My name is still Natalie Brooks," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Brooks was my mother's maiden name, not my married name. When I knew you, I was Natalie Chen. My father was David Chen, a kind man who taught literature at the community college." Julian remembered her mentioning her father only once, saying he had died when she was young. She had not wanted to talk about it, and Julian had respected her privacy. Now, he wondered what else he had not known about the woman he had loved. "My mother remarried when I was 18, Natalie continued. "She married Robert Brooks 6 months after my father died. I thought she was just lonely, that she needed someone to help her through the grief. I did not realize until too late that Robert had been planning it all along." The limousine turned onto a quieter street, the city lights sliding past the windows like distant stars. Natalie's hands twisted in her lap, and Julian resisted the urge to reach for them. "Robert is not who people think he is," Natalie said, her voice tight with fear. "To the world, he is a respected media mogul and philanthropist. But behind closed doors, he is a monster. He married my mother for her life insurance policy. She had $2 million in coverage from my father's policy. 6 months after the wedding, my mother died in what was ruled an accidental fall down the stairs." Julian's blood ran cold. "You think Robert killed her?" "I know he did," Natalie said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I heard them arguing that night. I heard her scream. I ran to help her, but by the time I got there, she was already at the bottom of the stairs. Robert was standing at the top, and he looked at me with such coldness. He told me that if I ever said anything, I would have an accident too." The limousine stopped at a red light, and in the sudden stillness, Julian could hear Natalie's ragged breathing. He wanted to pull her into his arms to promise her that she was safe now, but he needed to understand everything first. "I was 19 and terrified," Natalie continued. "I had no other family, no money of my own, nowhere to go. Robert became my legal guardian because I was still in school. He controlled everything. My mother's life insurance, the house, even my college fund. He said he would take care of me, but his version of care was control." "So you ran," Julian said, understanding beginning to dawn. "When you met me, you were running from him." Natalie nodded. "I changed my name back to Brooks, got a job at that coffee shop near campus, and tried to disappear. For 6 months, I was free. I met you, and for the first time since my mother died, I felt happy. I felt alive. I thought maybe I could build a new life." "Then what happened?" Julian asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Natalie whispered. "He came to my apartment one night. He said that I belonged to him, that I was his investment, and that he had plans for me. He said, if I did not come back willingly, he would hurt you. He knew where you lived, where you worked, everything about you. He showed me photos of you leaving class, eating lunch, sleeping in your apartment." Julian's hands clenched. "You left to protect me?" "Had to," Natalie said, her voice breaking. "I loved you too much to let him hurt you. So I wrote that note, packed my things, and went back to Robert. I have been his prisoner ever since." The limousine pulled up to the Sinclair Hotel, but neither Julian nor Natalie moved. The driver waited patiently while inside the car. 10 years of silence finally broke open like a dam, releasing floodwaters. Julian's mind worked through everything Natalie had told him, piecing together the puzzle of her disappearance with the cold logic that had made him successful in business. But underneath that logic, emotion roared like a storm. Anger at Robert Brooks, fury at himself for not searching harder for her, and beneath it all, the love he had tried so hard to bury, rising up stronger than ever. "Why did Robert arrange this marriage?" Julian asked, his voice steady, despite the chaos inside him. "What does he gain from you marrying me?" Natalie wiped her tears with shaking hands. "Robert has been drowning in debt for years. His media empire looks strong from the outside, but inside it is crumbling. He made bad investments, trusted the wrong people, and now he owes money to dangerous individuals. He needs your technology patents and your connections to save himself from ruin." Julian understood immediately. A marriage between their families would give Robert access to Sinclair Technologies' resources. It would open doors that had been closed to him. It was a desperate move by a desperate man. "He has been grooming me for this for 3 years, Natalie continued, her voice hollow. "Teaching me how to act like a proper society daughter. Taking me to etiquette classes and charity events, making sure I knew exactly how to play the role of the perfect bride. When your grandmother approached him about arranging a marriage, Robert saw his chance." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Julian's grandmother had wanted him to marry someone from a good family, someone who could bring warmth into his cold life. Robert had presented Natalie as the perfect candidate, hiding the truth about who she really was and what he had done to her. Did my grandmother know? Julian asked, needing to understand if the woman who raised him had been part of this deception. No, Natalie said quickly. Margaret was kind to me. She thought she was helping you find happiness. Robert made sure she only saw what he wanted her to see. When she died last month, I thought maybe the marriage would be called off. But Robert had already signed the contracts. He told me that if I did not go through with it, he would destroy you financially and personally. Julian felt something cold and dangerous settle in his chest. Robert Brooks had made a fatal mistake. He had threatened the wrong person, manipulated the wrong family, and hurt the one woman Julian had ever loved. That was going to cost him everything. Listen to me carefully, Julian said, turning to face Natalie fully. His blue eyes, which most people found cold and intimidating, softened as they looked at her. Robert Brooks made one critical error in his planning. He arranged for you to marry me, but he forgot to consider what would happen if I actually cared about you. Hope flickered in Natalie's eyes, fragile as candlelight. Julian, you cannot fight him. He has connections everywhere. Judges, politicians, people who owe him favors. He will destroy you. A small smile touched Julian's lips, the first genuine smile he had allowed himself in years. Natalie, I've spent the last 10 years building an empire specifically because I was trying to fill the hole you left in my heart. I have more money than Robert could spend in 10 lifetimes. I have lawyers who eat men like him for breakfast. And I have something he will never have. What? Natalie whispered. The truth, Julian said simply. And the determination to protect the woman I love. The words hung in the air between them. Natalie's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were different from before. These were tears of relief, of hope, of 10 years of loneliness finally coming to an end. You still love me? She asked, her voice breaking. After everything, after I left you without explanation, you still love me? Julian reached for her hand, finally allowing himself to touch her. Her fingers were cold and trembling, but they fit perfectly in his, just as they always had. I never stopped, he said quietly. Not for a single day. I built Sinclair Technologies because I needed something to focus on besides missing you. I became the Ice King because it hurt too much to feel anything. But the moment I saw your face under that veil, everything I had buried came rushing back. Natalie threw herself into his arms, and Julian held her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair. Feeling her heart beat against his chest. For 10 years he had been half alive, going through the motions of success while feeling nothing. Now, holding Natalie again, he felt the ice around his heart finally begin to melt. They stayed like that for a long moment before Julian gently pulled back. We need to move quickly, he said, his mind already forming a plan. Robert will expect us to consummate the marriage tonight and leave for Greece tomorrow. Instead, we are going to disappear. Natalie looked confused. Disappear? How? I own properties all over the world that even my own staff do not know about, Julian explained. Safe houses I bought years ago, under different names. We will go to one of them while my lawyers build a case against Robert. If what you say is true about your mother's death, there will be evidence. There always is. But your company, Natalie protested, your responsibilities. You cannot just leave everything. Owen can handle the company for a few weeks, Julian said. He has been begging me for more responsibility anyway. And my responsibilities mean nothing if I lose you again. They exited the limousine and entered the hotel through a private entrance. The penthouse suite was magnificent, with floor-toozling windows overlooking the city. Luxurious furniture, and a bedroom that neither of them would be using tonight. They had more important things to do than sleep. Julian immediately went to the suite safe and pulled out a laptop and several phones. These are secure devices, he explained. Untraceable. I keep them for emergencies. While Julian worked, Natalie stood at the windows, looking out at the city lights. I used to imagine this moment, she said softly. Seeing you again, explaining everything. But I never thought it would actually happen. I thought I would spend the rest of my life pretending to be someone I was not, married to a man I barely knew. Julian looked up from his laptop. Did you really think I would not recognize you? A sad smile touched her lips. Robert thought 10 years was enough time. He thought you would have forgotten me, moved on, married someone else. He did not understand that what we had was real. What we have, Julian corrected, standing and crossing to her. Present tense. What we have is real. He pulled her close again, and this time when he kissed her, it was not for show or tradition. It was a promise, a claiming, a vow that meant more than any words spoken in a cathedral. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "We have a long fight ahead of us," he warned. "Robert will not give up easily. There will be legal battles, media scrutiny, possibly even danger. Are you ready for that?" Natalie looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much pain, but still held courage. "I have been ready for 10 years, she said. "I just needed someone strong enough to stand beside me." "Then let's end this," Julian said. They spent the night planning. Julian made encrypted calls to his most trusted lawyers, explaining the situation and setting investigations in motion. He transferred funds to secure accounts. He arranged for private transportation to one of his hidden properties in the mountains of Colorado, a place where they could disappear while the legal machinery did its work, Natalie told him everything she remembered about the night her mother died. Every detail about Robert's business dealings. Every piece of evidence she thought might help. Julian recorded it all, his analytical mind cataloging information and building a strategy as dawn broke over the city. Painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they were ready. Julian had arranged for a private helicopter to pick them up from the hotel's roof. Owen would make excuses about a sudden change in honeymoon plans. The media would be told that the newlyweds wanted privacy. By the time Robert Brooks realized what was happening, they would be gone. Julian stood at the window, watching the sunrise, feeling something he had not felt in 10 years. Peace, purpose. The ice that had surrounded his heart for so long had melted completely, and in its place was something warm and strong and unbreakable. Natalie came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing me, for protecting me, for still loving me after all this time." Julian turned to look at her, this woman he had loved and lost and found again. The morning light caught in her dark hair and turned her green eyes to emeralds. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was brave. She had survived 10 years of control and fear, and she had never stopped fighting. "I would do anything for you," Julian said simply. "I would give up my company, my fortune, everything I have built, just to see you smile again." Natalie's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "You know what the funny thing is?" she said. "Robert thought this marriage would save him. He thought controlling me would give him power over you. But he gave me the one thing I needed most." "What's that?" Julian asked.
Natalie
Said. "He brought me back to you, and together we are going to take everything from him."
How?
Julian smiled. And it was not the cold smile of the Ice King. It was the warm smile of a man who had finally found his way home. "Yes," he agreed. "We are." The helicopter landed on the roof as planned. Julian and Natalie gathered the few things they needed and left the penthouse suite behind. As they climbed into the helicopter and lifted off into the bright morning sky, Julian looked down at the city below. Somewhere down there, Robert Brooks would soon discover that his perfect plan had fallen apart. Julian did not feel sorry for him. He looked at Natalie, buckled into the seat beside him, her hands still clasped in his. She was looking forward, toward the mountains and the future, toward freedom and justice and the life they would build together. The Ice King's heart had melted, and in its place was something much more powerful. Love. Real, true, unbreakable love. The kind of love that survives separation and pain. The kind of love that conquers fear and defeats evil. The kind of love that writes its own ending. And this ending, Julian knew, was really just a beginning. 3 months later, Robert Brooks was arrested on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and murder. Julian's lawyers had done their work well, uncovering evidence that even the best connections could not hide. Natalie testified against him with Julian at her side every moment. The media called it the scandal of the decade. But for Julian and Natalie, it was simply justice. They renewed their vows a year later in a small ceremony with only close friends present. This time, when Julian lifted the veil, there were no secrets between them. There was only love, pure and simple and strong enough to weather any storm. The Ice King had melted, and the girl who disappeared had finally come home. Together, they built a life filled with warmth and laughter, and the kind of happiness that only comes from fighting for what truly matters. And they lived, as all true love stories promise, happily ever after.